I think this might be a good time to get started here, and maybe some people are going to straggle in the next couple of minutes, but no big deal. So let's get started. I'll share my screen here and we'll get rolling. Great. So welcome everybody. Good evening. Hope this all finds you well. This is the intro webinar for our 4-week course through Centercourt 360 titled Leadership That Lasts, Finding Your Voice as an Effective Moral Leader. My name is Joe LaLiberte.
And I'm Nick Nowak, and thanks for joining us here. If you're like Joe and I, then you have likely been looking at whatever screen you're looking at for a good portion of your day. So we'll have some slides to go along here, but if you feel the need to look just above your computer and give your eyes a break, feel free. You should be able to get most of this from what we tell you, and hopefully we can get you excited about taking leadership that lasts.
Great, thanks, Nick. A little bit briefly about us. Again, I'm Joe LaLiberte. I am a graduate of Middlebury College. I currently work as a middle school algebra teacher at Delbarton School. I also coach football and track and field there, and work in a couple different extracurriculars, including the ski club, board game club, middle school magazine, etc. I was brought in to the Centercourt 360 family right around its inception through Rob Flynn, a colleague of mine at Delbarton. And super pumped to be involved, super happy to be here. I've done some of the tutoring, and now I'm excited to get into the course and instructional side of things. And Rob asked me a couple weeks ago to design a course based on leadership and my experiences through my summer work at Camp Belknap up in Tuftonboro, New Hampshire. And that's how I know Nick. We're going to talk a little bit later about how our experiences at Belknap tie into this course and the structure of this course and kind of where we're pulling our information from. But the second that Rob asked me to see if I could get somebody involved to help me teach a course on leadership, I instantly thought of Nick Nowak, who's been a mentor of mine for many years, and now recently a close friend and colleague, as we've gotten an experience to work on the senior staff together on the last couple of years. So it's great to have Nick here and as a part of the Centercourt 360 family, and I'll let him do himself some justice.
Thank you, Joe. Yeah, it's great to be here. And just to tell you a little bit about myself, apart from working at Belknap with Joe, I graduated from Colby College, played soccer there, went on and did my graduate work for education at the University of New Hampshire. I work at Cardigan Mountain School now, teaching some writing, coaching some soccer, and working as the director of student life there. And that little logo down on the bottom right, I picked the worst time to start a business that is called Good Menders. And right now just doing some writing for that, but trying to hopefully at some point get a little momentum talking to different schools and institutions about how we can detox masculinity and other issues of social justice to help promote equal educational opportunity. But again, really, really excited to be talking about leadership with Joe here for the next few weeks, and we'll start telling you more about what that's going to look like.
Great. So just a couple nuts and bolts about the course, just so we're all on the same page. This, again, is an intro webinar, a little bit of a preview of what we're going to be starting next week on Monday, May 4th. I saw, maybe if you're any Star Wars fans in there, big Star Wars day, so pay a little homage there. But yeah, that starts on Monday, May 4th. It's going to run every week for the next 4 weeks at 7:30. Our purpose for the course is to develop a working framework to be a positive leader of moral character by engaging each other as a class in discussion and as an analysis of leadership and its many nuances. This is through case studies, through examples, through different discussions and writing we'll do week to week. This is a 4-week course. Again, we're going to meet 1 hour per week, and we're going to supplement that with about 30 minutes to 1 hour of additional reading and writing so that we can come in and have something to work on from week to week as we transition our sessions. This course is intended for middle and high school students, but open to all, and those who are aspiring to be leaders in their schools, on their teams, in their communities, and elsewhere. Ultimately, we want you or your child, depending on who's watching, to be able to walk away with a personalized working leadership framework to put into action and to implement in your own life, or again, in your child's life, depending on which perspective that is. And if you don't know a lot about what a leadership framework is, Nick's going to do it a little bit of justice here and explain what I mean by that.
Yeah, so a leadership framework, you can think of it as an essential supporting structure of your leadership style and your decision-making process. So really a succinct set of guidelines of a creed that you use to guide your decisions, your behavior as a leader. And for me, doing this was really helpful, really important for me to think about how I approach my work each day, how I just approach living each day. So I don't know if we're going to be able to see it right. We should be able to see in the participants panel if you're able to just kind of raising your virtual hands, if you know how to do that on Zoom. How many of you would say, based off of the definition I just gave, currently have some kind of a leadership framework? Just checking the participants here. Again, not sure if everyone, oh, we got one. Thank you, Mr. Woods. If you haven't become Zoom savvy, there's still time to do so. Or hopefully what that means is you don't all have a leadership framework yet, and that you are excited to have one by the time, thank you, Mr. Catchpole, as well, to have one by the time we finish this course. So for me, the main points of my leadership framework: first, lead by example. That's the one I work with our student leaders here at Cardigan, and have worked with our young leaders at Belknap for a while now. And that's always number one for me, that you have to lead by example, particularly when it comes to character. And we'll talk a lot about that during this course. The next three here, as all good educators do, I've stolen from Daniel Coyle, his book, The Culture Code, really, really great book. But to radiate belonging cues, to be vulnerable, and to communicate purpose. And then my final one is to be useful and joyful. So that's my framework that I use to guide my leadership. Joe, you want to go through yours?
Yeah, definitely. First and foremost, put others first. So putting others before yourself in all areas of life. So leading, however that works out. Saying to another one that I took as well from Belknap, that again, like Nick said, we use on a daily basis, lead by example, or LBE, an acronym we use. So whether you're with 2 people or 100 people, to lead like you're under a microscope, to seek feedback high and low. So when working with a team or a group, to seek feedback not only from those more senior, more experienced than I, and get feedback on how to improve my craft as I move forward as a leader, but also to seek feedback from those I'm working with. You know, if you're working with a team and you are the leader, you're the person in charge, I think it's important to seek feedback from those beneath you to make them feel like their voice can be heard and their voice is important to you and to the group. Be the glue. For me, that means being someone who can connect groups, young and old, in different communities. So in a Belknap lens, kind of trying to connect old leaders and young leaders. You know, similarly to a Delbarton aspect, trying to connect young middle school kids with older mentors in the senior or junior classes, et cetera, et cetera. And then finally, making the hard choice, something I've kind of used the last couple of years of my life, thinking about one that, you know, Nick used on his, embracing vulnerability or being vulnerable, I think is something that for me sometimes is a hard choice to make, but often one that is rewarding in the end. And that's generally what happens when you do make the hard choice. It's something that's harder, and what you can frame that in any way you want, whether that's in your personal life or in your work life. But often making the hard choice, doing the dirty work, learning by doing, is going to set you up for success. So that's a little preview on the leadership framework. Nick's going to get into that in a little bit, but we're going to go through each session individually right now and talking about what we're going to discuss each week. So the first, session 1, is going to be on character and identity. As Nick said, character and identity are central and foundational to leadership. If you don't know who you are as an individual, your style, how people interact with you, how you interact with others, your strengths, your weaknesses, what kind of leader you are. I thought going into my leadership experience at Belknap and my experience at Delbarton that I kind of knew what my strengths and weaknesses were and my style was. And I think it takes that extra step of being flexible and, learning as you go to really understand, what are my strengths, what are my weaknesses, how can I use those to my advantage, how can I lead others knowing what I know. And so we're going to, just as an example of one of the activities we're going to do right off the bat, this is something we do with our leaders at Belknap early on, and just trying to give everybody a visual representation of what kind of leader you are. This is a pretty common activity that a lot of you may have seen already, but people, you're asking somebody, and obviously we're going to give some more detailed guidelines of, what kind of leader are you? How do you make decisions? Where do you think you fit on this compass? Just to give yourself a base style. And so that's kind of where we're going to start and talk about a leader as an individual, how character and identity plays into leadership, and how does your style define you as a leader?
So this next slide here, talking about pressures and stereotypes, this is, I think, a concept that's often overlooked in terms of leadership, because we're often blind to it and our own biases, our unconscious biases. So we'll be looking at stereotypes that play into being a male leader or being a female leader, how that can either make your job as a leader easier or more difficult, and how you can work through that, how you can be more empathetic, what other identity-based stereotypes we might be dealing with, either, again, in the classroom, in the workplace, on the sports field, wherever, and talking about how we can better understand and acknowledge bias and privilege, and how we can turn that into a strength and an opportunity. And it's, again, a really important topic, kind of in everything that we do, and something that I'm sure if you are in school right now, you are talking about stereotypes, you are talking about privilege, you are talking about how to be more culturally responsive, how to better understand others. And this is a really important part of being a well-rounded and an understanding leader, especially if you're going to understand how to follow, and you're going to understand how to lead, and you're going to understand how to work with different people.
Great. Our third session is going to focus on conflict resolution. So given what you've learned, hopefully at this point in the course, your strengths, your weaknesses, your style, and discussing who you are as an individual, how do you handle adversity? How do you handle challenges? How do you handle conflict as a leader? How are your strengths and weaknesses, again, and your style going to play into that? How are you going to be able to communicate effectively with your team without kind of losing your cool? We're going to discuss the importance, as we've talked about already, of vulnerability and tips for active listening, very quick do's and don'ts. And then finally, we're going to look at a couple different case studies and break out into different groups and discuss different scenarios, how each person would handle it. And of course, no leader is the same as another, and everyone has their own style and unique traits. So thinking about how each individual would approach each situation. And we're going to give everybody some concrete examples to work off of. And then finally,
so this is where Joe and I both really believe that if you're going to take the time to go through these 4 weeks with us, we want you to walk away with something concrete. And that's why we started off by showing you the concept of that framework. And we want everyone to walk away with their first leadership framework, something that you can take with you as you go on to whatever arena. something that is really transferable. That's why we're talking about moral character. That's why we're talking about some of these bigger do's and don'ts of leadership, about strengths and weaknesses, and again, some of these broader topics. But we really want, in the end, for you to walk away and not just be a specialized leader in some realm, but to have really some of those super important soft skills to go and be a leader no matter where you are. So we have that as a goal for all of you, and it's something that we found has been really helpful for us as we've moved between different areas in our own lives. And yeah, I think if we transition now to talking about Belknap a little bit, this is again the shared experience that Joe and I have. We've both been working at Camp Belknap for a really long time. It's a place that has a homegrown leadership process. So you grow up there as a camper, and if you are fortunate, you are selected to go on and join the leadership training program, and then hopefully eventually become a leader at Belknap. And whether that happens or not, your experience as a younger camper is looking up to these role models, these leaders who, for me, were really unlike any other role model that I had in my life. And they were a lot of the framework that I laid out at the beginning of this comes from really the kind of people that I looked up to. It was people who were vulnerable, who were young men who were and grown men who were willing and ready to be vulnerable and to even cry in front of me, to tell me that they cared about me, to emphasize kindness and putting the other person first, to work really hard, but to not be arrogant, and to be humble, and to serve a purpose greater than yourself, to be helpful and joyful. So I grew up aspiring to be this kind of leader. And what I found, once I was fortunate enough to go through the process and to still be a part of the leadership at Belknap, is, for me, the longer I was there, the more I understood that by building this foundation of moral character and moral leadership, I was able to transfer those skills to everything else that I was doing in life. And from talking to fellow leaders, from talking to future employers who were asking me, where can we find another guy from Belknap to hire? It became pretty obvious that this foundation of character was something that was, one, sticky. It was something that you could latch onto, and that you could understand, and that you could feel good about. But it was also something that you could apply to being an athlete, to being a student, to being a teacher, to being a leader, wherever it may be. So that's really our goal for you, is to give you a framework of leadership that no matter who you are, you don't have to be the biggest jock at your school. You don't have to be the most popular kid. I know the guys that I have looked up to in my life have been all sorts of different kinds of leaders. You can have influence, you can lead by example, and you can be useful, you can do good. So that's our goal for all of you.
Yeah, and I think it's important to recognize the fact that, we're not going to try and ascribe every student in this course to a rigid kind of set of Belknap specific values. This is not what we're here for. We just know that through our experiences in the leadership and on the staff at this one specific place, that there are a lot of skills that we've learned and have used in our own working lives to implement as leaders in general. And so obviously these skills, these foundational principles, belong to a lot of different organizations and communities across the country and the world. And I think obviously while this camp is an all boys setting, and we have experience in all boys schools, we're still extremely confident that these skills obviously are gender fluid. They cross across, they can apply to men and women alike. And so our goal is to kind of take what we've learned here, and again, not try and prescribe somebody to the Belknap model, but more so to try and take the foundational principles, skills, activities, exercises, what have you, that we've learned, and try and help you navigate your own life, again, whether that's in school, on the field, in your community, wherever you see that fitting. So I hope that was clear and not too much on this Monday night for you. We were going to open it up here to questions and answers if you guys have any of those. We wanted to keep it short and sweet tonight, so we'll kind of open the floor there.
And feel free to either chime in or enter those in the chat.
Yep.
I know we have one question here to start us off, just about if, let me make sure I'm getting this right. Can basic introverts who don't have dynamic or dominant personalities still be good leaders? And if so, how? I love this question because I feel like I relate to it quite a bit. I would definitely count myself as an introvert. I would credit my experience at Belknap as what helped to give me, again, the leadership as a younger person to start to be more of an extrovert. But as I always told younger leaders who I was training, you have to be authentic, and that through time you learn how to apply different styles. So for me, 90% of the time, I'm a pretty reserved and laid back person who you're not going to hear yell very much. But 10% of the time, if I need to turn it on and go a little bit crazy, then I've learned how to do that. But if that isn't authentic to your personality, then it's not going to make you an effective leader if you're forcing that. So you can absolutely be an introvert and be a good leader. That's where leadership by example is huge. I know that's at Cardigan, the biggest thing I stress with all of our leaders. You can have as much leadership potential in the world, but if you don't have the character to back it, then you're not going to be an effective leader. If you have really, really sound character, then we can work with that.
Let's just go down the list here, Nick. Steven says, do you coach boys to be leaders differently from girls? So I think off the top of my head, I would say yes and no. I think there are certainly, skill sets, and different attributes that kind of consist regardless of gender, across the board to leaders. I think I would be, lying if I didn't say that boys and girls, men and women, are under the pressure and influence of very different stereotypes. So I think in that sense, each individual experience is each individual experience. And so our goal here is to kind of take each individual student and cater towards where they're coming from and their experiences as a boy or a girl. But so I hope that answers your question. I think yes and no, just due to the fact that the stereotypes are very different, the pressures are very different, the settings, and the way that each person navigates their own life. But of course, there are skills and strategies that are not gender specific.
And just to add a bit there, kind of as a preview to, as we're talking about some of these stereotypes, you can, I think we would like to, again, when we're talking about and teaching broader terms of leadership, we would like to be approaching everyone as if here are universals of leadership. And in terms of, if we're giving a preview to some of those stereotypes, that's what we want to talk about with the group. If you're a boy who is aggressive and you are a girl who is aggressive, your audience is going to perceive that differently. While it could be stereotypically perceived as a positive for a boy, it could be perceived as a negative for a girl. And is that right? No. But that's a stereotype that we have to talk about and understand, and then be able to get beyond, so that everyone can be an effective leader.
Great. Let's see. Going down the list here, some nuts and bolts. Schedule for planning. It is the next 4 Mondays at 7:30. Matt and Terry, you can confirm they're hour-long sessions. And someone else asked about registration. Are we automatically registered in the following sessions, or do we have to sign up for them? Maybe if Matt or Terry, you could jump in.
Yeah, so you're not automatically registered. We'll send out a follow-up email after this if you'd like to register. And we'll keep the sessions to, I think, an hour. If there's question and answer that take us to an hour, then that's fine. But we'll probably shoot for like a 35, 45 minute kind of discussion, and then kind of leave Q&A for the end there.
Let's see.
We got one here that says, how can you work on shutting off the mob mentality and work on being a leader in tough situations? That's a good question. Probably not one that we have the silver bullet to right now. Mobs come in all different shapes and sizes. And I think that's probably a discussion we'd have to get into a little more depth with, because you won't be able to shut off all mobs if you are just one person. Even Martin Luther King found that out. So there's only so much that we are capable of as leaders in a given space and time. But I think you need to garner mutual trust. You need to be someone that people can rely on, that through your actions, again, leadership by example, people come to see you as someone of sound judgment and a voice of reason. You don't waste your words, you use them with value, so that when you speak, people listen. So there's a lot that goes into there. No silver bullet.
Someone messaged me here asking about leadership as it pertains to sports and to athletics. So, I think just from a background perspective, I don't think I got a chance to say at the beginning. I know Nick played soccer at Colby. I played football at Middlebury, and so kind of give you our perspective as student athletes in college. And hopefully, I'd imagine we have a lot of aspiring college athletes on this call, young men and women trying to become leaders in their sports. And I think it's important, we're going to touch on definitely how in each arena leadership is, it's important to kind of approach each arena differently. As I think about sports, the leader on the field is not necessarily the loudest person or the biggest, rah-rah, most aggressive person on the field, but somebody who can kind of show up every day, put the work in, communicate effectively, adhere to their character. They don't have to be, there's no rule book that says a leader has to be loud or quiet, an active communicator or otherwise. And so I think, leading by example and through your actions is nearly as important as saying and trying to communicate your leadership ideas, styles, what have you. And so I think it's important that, understanding that given this community of Centercourt and what Centercourt is and transitioning here, there are a lot of athletes likely on this call and in the community. And so we definitely want to spend some time talking about that as it relates to the conflict resolution section, and how we can pull the leader out of you on the court or on the field or what have you, because I think there's a lot of young men and women who have those leadership traits but don't know how to use them and don't understand what is my character, what are my strengths and weaknesses, what are my style, how are we going to build that foundation to understand how I could potentially become a leader in these arenas. So we're definitely going to hit that for sure. Thank you.
That's great, Joe. I think that's key. I think there's a lot of young men and women on our Centercourt club teams that are already good leaders and may not realize it, like you said. And so I think just making sure they understand that they are a leader, and you don't need to force it. You don't need to push yourself to be more than what you're doing already, but to kind of, like we say, kind of pour gasoline on that fire and just produce more of that and more effectively. So I think that's going to be important for a lot of our young men and women on this call or on our club teams to realize that, even if you are in 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, learning how to be a leader on your team now is going to carry you through high school and into college. And you don't need just one leader on the team. The more leadership type mentalities you have, the better. And there's different forms of that. So I think that's good that you hit on that. One question I would have for you is, I know that, obviously with Centercourt, we have some individual sports as well that we offer. And what are your thoughts on being a leader in terms of whether it be tennis or golf or swimming or wrestling or something that may be more individual type? How do you kind of talk to that a little bit, and why that's important to still kind of have those leadership qualities and maybe not so much a team atmosphere?
Yeah, so I think I was never personally someone who played individual sports, but as I think about it in terms of our framework session to session, I think first and foremost, to be a leader in any arena, again, you need to know who you are. We need to stop kind of circling the wagons of identity and kind of get down to the nitty gritty of who are you as a person and what are your strengths and weaknesses. For me personally, I know I'm a competitive person, and sometimes I can be stubborn in competition. So I feel like if I was a golfer or a tennis player, two sports which are individual and I think have a big mental game, understanding for myself, like, okay, I don't want to get, tied up in competition or too stubborn. And so I need to think about, ways that I can combat that in my everyday life. How am I going to be able to kind of suppress that when it's coming and remain cool and calm? And I think about, different structures. We've talked about leadership by example. If you want to be a great, and I keep talking about tennis or golf, of course, there are other individual sports that aren't coming to my head right now, but, if you want to be a great athlete in whatever arena you are in, thinking about leading by example is extremely important. How do you carry yourself on the court, on the field, on the green, wherever it is? How are people going to perceive you? That person's a great player, but they're arrogant, they're cocky, right? Is that necessarily great foundational principles of leadership? We may disagree. And I think once you understand a little bit more and do a little bit more digging into who you are as a person, you can kind of act in accordance with those tenets and values. And so I think that, these principles as foundational principles, things that you can hold on to, again, in all aspects of life, can be catered to team sports, to individual sports, and extracurriculars in general.
Looks like we got one more question here, and then I think it's probably time soon to wrap up, Joe, looking at where we're at. But how would you advise students to deal with bullying at schools, and what would a leader do to deal with a bully? Another one of those no silver bullet type answers, very situational as well. What's your relationship with the bully? It could be your best friend. That completely changes how you're going to approach that situation. It could be your biggest nemesis. It could be someone you have never met before. So context is really important there in terms of how you address it. I think if possible, strength in numbers is always really helpful. That's where having really good friends is awesome. Being able to say, hey, look what's going on over there, grab a friend and go deal with it is a really, really powerful thing. And if you're confident enough in your own voice to know that you can confront a situation and say, hey, that's not okay, or to find a way to deflect, to grab that student who's being bullied and to say, hey, why don't you come sit with me, to show the reverse of whatever the bully is showing at that time. There's bullying is a super prevalent, super complicated issue in schools, something that we do need to deal with. The advice of just ignore it isn't really great advice, and something that we can definitely get into more detail throughout the sessions as we're talking about leadership.
Great. All right, seems like that's the last of our questions. So I'd just like to say thank you everybody for tuning in. Hopefully you enjoyed our evening session here and maybe are interested in our 4-week course, again, starting next week, Monday, May 4th. And you can find out more information about that on the Centercourt 360 website. So thank you guys so much. Hope you enjoyed the presentation. Have a great night and hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Joe and Nick. It was fabulous.
Thank you,
Thank
Tara.
you.